Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. I'm sure you've seen this cliche in the liberal media that swathes of young people, even older people, especially men, are being radicalised on the right wing. And I got thinking about this last night because I was thinking, well, a lot of people just have, vaguely traditional views, but that's described as somehow radical, even evil, which begs the question, who's really been radicalised? I'm not denying here that there is, a niche extremism on the right. People can be radicalised. I think there was a story a couple of weeks ago. 3 sort of neo-Nazi types planned some attacks. You could see a collective yes at the BBC. We've got one! Finally, we can stick it to the bigots. They were putting that one front and centre. Because we all know the bigger problem in the UK is with regards to a certain religion of peace. But that doesn't tend to be too popular with our liberal overlords, so I'm sure they're very happy to get this one. I'm sure none of us, are pro any of this sort of nonsense that these lads got themselves involved in. But the point is that on the whole, almost the whole of anything critical of the liberal system is described with the same venom as real extremism. And I think there's a real problem there. I think there's another problem, actually, to be fair, in what you could term performative rightism. You get a lot of it online these days. I think people just saying things to be edgelords and based and red-pilled as they can. In many ways, I think that these people are probably quite harmful to any sort of traditional movement because they make it too cliche and it gets a little bit, low IQ and the rest of it. And I don't think it's really a healthy argument that's life-giving. I often say, you need a life-giving belief system rather than a life-taking one that's just about arguing with people online or makes you angry. Anyway, the point I'm getting to here is what exactly is it about the traditional worldview that's so evil? After all, it seems to be something like if you hold to a belief in traditional gender roles, if you believe mass immigration and multiculturalism aren't good things, and if you believe that the British, like all European people, in fact all people around the world, have a unique identity that belongs in their home nations to them alone, you will be seen as some problematic, twisted, brainwashed maniac. And this got me thinking, well, when did this start to happen? Because really, that's the standard British position. It has been ever since the foundation of these isles. In fact, it's the standard world position. Everybody really thinks this and always has. So how is it really radical? Well, of course, it's not radical. It's actually normal. It's only seen as radical, or could only be seen as radical, if there'd been some great shift, a great disturbance in the force. And that could be perhaps pointing to the liberal revolution, especially year zero with Tony Blair, where he really brought in this idea of a new normal. Everything restarted. Being British was about tolerance and the rest of it. And I often see this, in the generations. I've said before, I have a grandma who's 95, very close to. She's a Yorkshire woman. And it's quite interesting because our worldview is very similar. And she's a very sweet lady. She'll say to me things like, she lives in Leicester, near my mother now, and Leicester, as I'm sure you all know, is extremely diverse. So she'll say, I don't have a problem with them, Richard, lad. Some of them are very nice. There's just too bloody many of them here, lad. And I'm thinking, yeah, I couldn't agree more, Grandma. I don't have a problem with them, but there's just so many of them. Why do we need this many? But of course, this would mean by the logic of the system that my grandma is radicalised. Those 95-year-old bigots. They've ruined our country. But I can often see that with my parents, they were probably the epicentre of the liberal regime, and now it's sort of doing the boomerang, going back the other way. But it made me think, last night, why is it radical to notice a natural order between men and women? That seems like the most natural and sacred and beautiful thing that we can find cross-culturally throughout time. Isn't it radical to try and squish that dynamic and equalise everything across the board? I mean, if you think about it, all cultures note this difference between the masculine and the feminine. And if there is some smarty pants leftist who's stumbled across this video and is going to actually me about this, I know there is aberrations here and there where there were matriarchal cultures, but they're extraordinarily rare and, of course, overemphasised by the liberal left-controlled academic apparatus. They will fund these sorts of studies to make it seem like, modern egalitarianism and feminism as the natural order of things. It's very much not, of course. What we tend to find is, again, cross-culturally, you have this same dynamic. China, the yin and yang, that's the masculine and feminine. You can say in Vedic philosophy, Shiva and Shakti. In Egypt, or ancient Egypt, Osiris and Isis. And then, of course, the more Indo-European notion of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. Don't think you need any introduction into that. Very much God the Father, the Spirit, and Mother Earth. We've all come across these notions before, very central in Christianity and even Western paganism too. Talking of paganism, you also have Odin and Thor on the masculine side and Frigg and Sif on the feminine. And throughout these traditions, you find the male often represents the active, outward, sky-associated spiritual power, while the female embodies an inner, nurturing and fateful energy, if you will. But how would these disparate cultures know this? They didn't really have any interaction with one another. So how did they come to these same conclusions about life? Well, of course, the traditionalist philosophy would say this is just the natural order of things. It's the implied state of being, if you will. It's natural to us. I was speaking on the sister channel the other day about how you take a pigeon and drive it miles away from its nest and go around all roundabouts and so on, and then you let it free and it basically just flies back. The pigeon knows, it has an inner knowing. I think human beings are the same with regards to things like this at the core of our culture. Incidentally, this is why I recently released the course on traditionalism. You can check that out down below in the description if you're interested. Discount for all Substack subscribers. But anyway, the point is that you could argue with the advent of quote-unquote reason in the Western world, not that reason is a bad thing, of course, I'm not saying that, but the dominance of the idea that our mind can figure everything out with data sets, we've just almost moved away from natural wisdom. The culture of critique has almost divorced us, if you will, from natural hierarchy and order that once sustained our civilization. And that's why you could say that in this day and age, what we've been taken over by is actually the real radicalism. It's that which has completely been a fracture in the normal running of things, not just in Britain, but throughout time. It reminds me of this fascinating scene in Adam Curtis's brilliant documentary Bitter Lake. It's all about Afghanistan and how it became a bit of a cradle between world powers. And you have this fantastic scene where, we went into Afghanistan, of course, famously, and this liberal woman is there trying to modernize the Afghani woman. You can see it on your screen now. And it's just this bizarre scene where you see this Western madness that's overtaken us, where she's showing these Afghani women modern art of urinals that people piss in. And these Afghani women, who are probably more aligned, if you like, with more of just a standard order when it comes to these sorts of things, are just aghast. They're like, this is just disgusting. And it's one of these weird moments where you realise this toxicity that's taken over the Western world, and it just doesn't map on to the rest of the world. A lot of the time we think it's them that's gone wrong, but sometimes it's us. You could argue then, through a traditionalist lens, in many ways, that the modern West and the modern developments of liberalism are very much turned against the sacred themselves. They seem to want to equalise everything out. All hierarchy must go. It's all seen as unjust. The true sacred must go and really be replaced with liberal ideology about tolerance and kindness and these sorts of things, which is a sort of counterfeit version of the sacred in many ways, which, of course, the sacred is transcendent love. It doesn't deny hierarchy in the world. And, of course, this is why I think in the modern era, if you oppose things like mass immigration, if you wish to maintain your own ethno-cultural identity, it's seen as highly radical. Because you're making distinctions in the world, but distinctions in the world, the very things, the boundaries that the liberal ideology, the culture of critique says that it must break apart. Of course, many of us feel that such a world becomes increasingly strange and even tyrannical. After all, how many of us have said we don't want mass immigration, but have been told to shut up every time? There's this quote that goes around the internet from Aristotle speaking about multicultural societies, well over 2,000 years ago, but I think it's relevant to today. For Aristotle, democracy is possible only within homogeneous ethnic groups, while despots have always reigned over highly fragmented societies. A multi-ethnic society is thus necessarily anti-democratic and chaotic, for it lacks philia, this profound flesh and blood fraternity of citizens. Tyrants and despots divide and rule. They want the city divided by ethnic rivalries. The indispensable condition for ensuring a people's sovereignty accordingly resides in its unity. Ethnic chaos prevents all philia from developing. Well, I think if there's one thing we can draw from that, it's that Aristotle is a radicalised bigot. Into the dustbin of history with you, Aristotle, if that is your real name. Anyway, the point is here that it's pretty standard in human history for a given group to rule a given region. It's also pretty standard in human history to even have empires. We're sort of hidden from that truth in the liberal propaganda. They don't want you to think like that because it stops you from seeing that the empire we're living under now is the liberal regime. Largely centered in America, but obviously has its tentacles all over the world at this point, especially all over the Western world. Now, I'm not saying this state of empires is necessarily desirable, but it is the standard. Again, we've taken on this liberal ideology, or you could even say it's pre-liberal in many ways. This ideology really post-Enlightenment, that everything needs to be flattened out, this egalitarian, equalitarian ideal, starting really with the French Revolution and then arguably hitting its apex with communism. But we still really live this in a cultural sense today in many ways. And of course, the Christians in this day and age are so detached from the sacred, they think this is like loving, to adopt this ideology, not realizing that it's a poison that's corrupting the very church from the inside out. This is the thing about the Christian message of love, of course, that's so easily corrupted. I would say that the real message of Christian love is intensely beautiful when it's properly understood. But like most things, in this day and age, it's misunderstood, and it just basically means think of everybody the same. Love your neighbour, just accept liberal ideology. I don't think that's quite what it's saying. To my mind, it's always been we're all one, one in God's being, if you will, but not manifestation. So by all means, you can love people who are in different groups, if you will. That's will the good of the other. It's not soppy-doppy stuff. But by all means, you're welcome to have distinction in your own group. In fact, that's part of your own sacred journey, especially through your institutions that guide you to the divine. Of course, that's more of a niche thing that's only going to interest the esoteric types like me, but for most people, it acts, if you will, as providing the moral foundation that structures society. This again is, of course, why mass immigration is so dangerous, because you bring in all these different cultures and you're really hacking away at the roots of your own culture, which means everything becomes chaotic, which I think many of us would say now is the point of it. That's the plan. It's part of the liberal empire. And again, mass immigration too is a historical, religious and cultural anomaly. I'm sure again someone will find some rare example, or they'll say, yes, but this happened at some point in history. Yeah, and I'm sure it did once or twice, but the point is it's extraordinarily rare because it doesn't tend to work. In fact, even when people do point out in history, you'll find that there's always a dominant group, who rule things, a dominant caste or a dominant ethnic group or whatever, just like the modern UAE, actually. Lots of liberals will say, well, like the UAE. But if you actually look at the UAE, there's loads of people from all around the world there, but it's ruled by Arabs. It's the United Arab Emirates. If they wanted to kick you out tomorrow, they can. It's a theocracy for Arabs, and that's fine. I've got no problem with that. It's their country, do what they like. But my point is they have total political control. And nobody's bothered about that, are they? However, the problem with mass immigration and multicultural societies is, as Lee Kuan Yew, the great leader of Singapore, pointed out, in multiracial societies, you don't vote in accordance with your economic interests and social interests. You vote in accordance with your race and your religion. A word of warning there, and one that the modern West just isn't heeding, so we're going to have to go to the bitter end now, I think. But of course, again, as I say, regions that are the homeland of an ethno-religious mass are pretty normal in history. It's radical to change that model, which you could say modernity has very much. Again, I'm not saying here that, some immigration isn't to be expected. I think even 5% would be very high in historical terms. But I think, again, in a modern world, that's all right. You have to expect that. Capitals flowing over borders and so on. And I actually do genuinely believe in enrichment, actually. Unironically, if it's low. Like I've said before, you've got a wise Vedic master. What's wrong with taking that guy in? He teaches a lot. Great German engineers, a few folks from Hong Kong or whatever. That's fine, I'm all right with that. But it's when it starts to take everything over and it gets out of control. More importantly, the host people. are increasingly propagandized as bad if they speak out about it, or even just bad for their history and for existing. But of course, the liberal regime has hammered, this line hard, that anybody outside of it is a radical, and it comes from this long march through the institutions, of course. And they've really taken over so many of the key cultural institutions and just made it seem normal. And then essentially, if you're outside of it, there's lots to risk, your job, your reputation and so on. You can be easily destroyed. So it basically means that people have just had to get on board with it. I think the introduction of women into the workforce and politics and society is a big one as well, who tend to be more concerned with the socially accepted position of the group, a bit more confrontation averse, which means, again, almost this political correctness came with that. But in many ways, we can see how we've got in this mess. It's a misunderstood Christian message. This is what happens when you lose the sacred. It becomes politicized, materialized, which is what's happened. Then you throw in that rational individualistic humanism, there is no group, we're all just individuals and so on. Again, that can probably only work when you have the right foundations. And then mass atheism, cultural decline, total collapse of the sacred order and so on. And you think, well, who are the real radicalizers? Again, I would say it's since Blair. And if you oppose this, you are some nutcase. And this is why, even in the modern era, things have gone so crazy that even, if you're a real conservative, you're radical. And I mean, as in an actual conservative. I mean, in many ways, that died with Roger Scruton, really. It doesn't really exist anymore. Because what you have now in place of conservatism is sort of, Thatcherism in economics with some libertarian ideals in the shape of someone like Farage. The sort of demagogic populist, as represented by someone like Robert Jenrick, running around desperate for your attention, But you can tell, just wants votes, doesn't really get it. And of course, the counterfeit modernist conservative, representing nothing really but the maintenance of the liberal order itself, someone like Rory Stewart, fits this mould very well. Incidentally, as I understand it, Rory Stewart's wife was one of these women who went out to Afghanistan to teach them all about modern degenerate art, which sort of gives you a flavour of the sort of conservatism that interests him. Anyhow, I thought we'd look at some examples to see, who's really being radicalised. This is from a curriculum. I think it's an English literature degree, and I went through this at university. It's absolutely astonishing. Some people just don't believe you when you don't know how radicalised all of this is. So this is what English literature students are studying. Narrative theory, feminist theory, Marxist theory, eco-critical theory, post-colonial theory, literary value, and the canon. Essentially, this is just indoctrination into a radical leftist worldview. And I remember at university myself, there is no conservative reading. You're not offered that. There's no neutral reading. It's all the leftist reading, and that is implied as correct all the time. If you go outside of it, you'll be marked down. If you're too controversial, you might even be thrown off the course. So the point is that this is how youngsters are brought into the world, and then they think this is normal. And then this is why, of course, they go into the institutions, the BBC, education, and the rest of it, and they just pass this on. And to them, it's normal, and anything outside of it, which is actually normal, is seen as radical. Of course, this is the reason why university used to be only for the very top, the elite, because they would be able to go to university and see through this nonsense, because they're thinking critically, they're very bright. But the problem is when you open up university to everybody in this, naive egalitarian dimension, you just send a load of midwits to university who listen to this stuff uncritically. They don't challenge it. They just think, well, this must be what the truth is. And this is, again, it's all part of the financialization of the university system. It's just about making money now and liberal ideology, which is pretty much the world at large. And again, the sacred order, the hierarchy, our tradition, it just burnt alive. It's tragic. It also leads to things like this. People go into the media industries, as I say, pump this stuff out. And this is, I think it's from America. It states, do you agree with the phrase white people invented slavery? You can see that 25% of white men think yes, they did. 39% of white women think they did. Bloody hell. 49% of Hispanic men think they did. 59% of Hispanic women think white people did. 53% of black men think white people invented slavery. I mean, come on, the black folks even sold other blacks to the whites in the first place. And 69% of black women think that white folks invented slavery. So you can see how the problem starts. Another one that did the rounds online a few months ago is this one, how racial groups rate each other. Now, of course, we're told endlessly in the Western world that white people are pure evil. But as I've said many times, if you actually look around to white people you know, they're the only group really that try to live in this post-racial way, And you can see from this graph here, when you see how racial groups rate each other, whites ever so slightly rate themselves above the other groups, ever so slightly, but basically they rate everyone the same. Hispanic respondents think whites are absolutely abysmal. Blacks are all right. Hispanics are absolutely great, and Asians are all right. Black respondents think whites are worse than abysmal, just pure evil, while blacks are absolutely incredible. Hispanics are like, all right. Asians, nah, I don't really like you, but you're not as bad as the whites. Even the Asians think the whites aren't all that good. Not as bad as the Hispanics and the blacks, but not very fond of us. The blacks, I don't think, are nearly as bad as the whites. Hispanics, a little worse than the blacks. And, of course, Asians, they think, are the best. Now, the problem with all this is down the line, it leads to people like this. This is this Dr. Shola Moz Shogabimu Bedimu. Forget how to pronounce the name. She's a princess or something from Nigeria, and she's always going on about privilege and how evil white people are. And, she's having a go at Rupert Lowe the other day on Twitter. She says, white people do not experience racism at any structural or systemic level of society. White race, I think she means the white race, created racism for the benefit of white people to deny black and brown people an equal value of life and liberty. Caucasity, I think that's a portmanteau of Caucasian and audacity, of claiming a false equivalence of racial oppression is whiteness personified. If you actually look at what she's saying there, she means to say caucasity of claiming an equivalence, not a false equivalence, which is not what Rupert Lowe's doing. But anyway, that's beside the point. I was looking at this and thinking, the liberal regime, they might not think this person is like bang on, centre left, the sort of robot they want in charge, like Keir Starmer. But she's much closer to what they want than someone like me or you, To the system, we're radicalised, and this is much more normal. But as you can see, this person's completely nuts, completely radicalised, is only here, really, to wind you all up and rage bait everybody. But in the modern system, this is seen as normal. As I say, it begs the question, who's really radicalised? Here's another one for you. This is a female reverend who probably in the Anglican Church, or Episcopalian as it's known in America. And she identifies as a trans-masculine dyke, whatever that is. But anyway, again, she would be closer to the system than me.
Hi, I am Reverend Lazarus Justice Jameson, and I am proud to be the co-founder of Profane Holiness Community Care. My pronouns are they, them. I am a trans-masculine dyke here in Portland, Oregon, but I am from St. Louis, Missouri. I am a trans refugee. I come to this work because I did organizing, political organizing, and religious organizing with trans, queer, and otherwise marginalized folks.
Yeah, I think that's enough out of you for one day, thanks, Reverend. But seriously, I'm supposed to be radicalised because of this. Sorry, but this person is radicalised. It's absolutely frickin' nuts. You're normal if you think this isn't normal. Anyway, here's another one. UN women. They say any job is a woman's job and just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. I think this is for Women's Day. And then you can see things like this on your screen right now. Here's some blokes doing the most horrible and appalling jobs you've ever seen. And these jobs are pretty much 100% male. And when they speak about any job is a woman's job, what they mean is being a CEO, being manager of HR, presenting the sports, being a pundit at the football, talking about how sexist the world is and evil the world is to the sympathetic nods of some cocked eunuch male. But in reality, the blokes are out here slaving their guts out, doing the most dangerous and scary jobs I think you could ever see, really for average pay. And then these blokes come home to watch TV and find people like Jon Stewart in America, John Leibovitz I think is his real name, doing segments called The Problem with White People. I'm sure we're all really interested in that one. This forms something of a school of thought amongst a certain section of society. So we can see plenty of books that have been released in recent years. Sure, you'll want to note some of these down for your Christmas lists for your family. White trash, angry white men, dying of whiteness, white privilege, seeing white race, white kids, white rage, white lies. Plenty of good ones there for our stockings. And do remember, you're the radicalised one for thinking something's untoward here. On to the next one. This is two gay guys who somehow have got a baby. And as you can see, it's not exactly in the natural order of things. Apparently one of these is a convicted child sex offender. I don't know if that happened before or after he got the baby, but whatever's going on, this is wrong and disgusting. But again, in the new world, I would be radical for saying such a thing, especially in the woke world or post-woke world. Interesting stat here, you can see a wide ideology gap started really when woke became a thing. Women became more and more liberal in South Korea, America, Germany and the UK, whereas men became more conservative. As someone points out here as well, it's very interesting how we can see that suicide rates massively increased with the advent of the woke ideology, especially among women. Again, I ask, who's really been radicalised? I saw this clip recently and thought it was particularly beautiful and poignant. It's some miners in County Durham, probably the sort of types, the old left, trade unions and all that, working damn hard. But they wouldn't be interested in this modern woke crap, which is why many of these people's grandsons now vote reform. But anyway, what do you think the modern world would think of these men?
Down to York, and if you want to see me in the perpendicular vein, when I'm busy setting timber in the barroom. In the barroom, that's where we congregate, to drill the holes and fill the coals and shovel back the slate. And for to do a job of work, I am never late. That's provided that we do it in the barroom.
Are these men just radicalised bigots like the rest of us? Or are these men our ancestors? People who built this nation, the real people who built this nation with their sweat and blood, the very salt of the earth. As I say, when they try this radicalisation line, I think we should question who's really been radicalised when you look at things throughout the span of our culture and history, rather since the year zero with Tony Blair. But remember, stay strong, friends. They have the power, but the earth and the gods are with us. If you're interested in my traditionalism course, do check it out down below. You can also join the Substack if you want to support me, get discounts on the courses, exclusive calls and the rest of it. Probably hold one next week, actually. Do check out the sister channel on spiritual and personal transformation as well. And subscribe to this channel if you're new. Enjoy the rest of your day.